All right, everyone. I think it's time to get started. It's 4 o'clock. We appreciate you coming. Oh, I can still hear a few more joining us. So I'm going to start by saying welcome to everyone. Thank you for coming to the Listenwise and Lexile Listening Measures in 2020 webinar. Thank you so much for attending. And one lucky attendee will receive a set of classroom headphones. So please stay tuned to the end of this webinar when we will be drawing a name and telling the winner at the very end of this webinar. First, I want to go over the agenda quickly. We are going to be talking about the components of literacy, the importance of how listening fits into literacy. Then we'll go into this exciting new announcement about the Lexile Listening Framework. We'll talk a little bit about how that features into the Listenwise and the value of listening. But first, I wanted to introduce myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Monica Brady-Meyerov. I'm the founder and CEO of Listenwise. And I'm a former public radio reporter. For more than 20 years, I was reporting for NPR and other public radio stations, doing great, compelling listening stories. And it really got me so excited about the power of audio to teach, and decided to leave public radio and create a company that's focused on building student listening skills and engaging them with exciting real-world stories from public radio and podcasts called Listenwise. And I also want to introduce my colleague on this webinar, Heather Coons. Heather?
Hi, I'm Heather Coons, and I'm the Director of Research Services here at Metametrics. I've been with Metametrics for more than 10 years and have spent much of that working on the Lexile Framework for reading. And I've also been involved in a number of other research projects, and am really excited to have helped direct this team responsible for our new offering, the Listening Framework. And I'm excited to have the opportunity to share our exciting work with you today. It's going to be a wonderful offering, and I think bring a lot to the educational field. So I'm glad to be here.
Great. So let's start by talking about the components of literacy. You probably have all seen the latest scores from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and they show that 2 out of 3 children did not meet the standards for reading proficiency in the 4th or 8th grade. And only 35% of 4th graders are proficient readers. So something's not working. Now, we believe that's because literacy is larger than reading, and educators are ignoring a foundational component of reading, listening. The other language skills, such as reading and writing, are things that we have to be explicitly taught. But listening, I think because it's not typically explicitly taught, it's overlooked. And researchers have found that the 4 language skills, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, are all integrated, and they all contribute to one's understanding of the world around them. Reading and listening are receptive skills, writing and speaking are productive skills, and according to research, there are substantial correlations between these 4 processes.
And so this is the reason why, starting next year, in Metametrics, and we've been doing research on this for a number of years actually, but starting next year, Metametrics is introducing new scales that measure aspects of literacy beyond silent reading. Many of you are very familiar with the reading framework, the Lexile Framework for Reading, which measures silent reading and also the complexity of text. The new scales we're developing will measure more components of literacy, such as vocabulary or reading and listening, and later on a writing measure will follow. We at Metametrics have watched the growing focus on listening skills in education and the workplace, and we know there's a real need for a reliable measure of student listening ability and a measure of audio passage complexity. And the Lexile Listening Framework's been developed to address that need.
And I want to encourage you to use the chat box to ask your questions that we'll try to get to in the end, or leave comments or thoughts as we move forward. But first, let's just talk about the importance of listening. Many research studies have shown that children who are better listeners are also better learners. And that's true in part because 85% of what we learn by listening. Listening comprehension is related to reading comprehension, so improving listening can help improve reading. Research by Dr. Tiffany Hogan, who's here in Boston, where we're located with Mass General Hospital, shows that listening comprehension and reading comprehension are closely tied through the 8th grade and beyond. And multiple studies have shown that students can understand texts that are 2 to 3 grade levels higher when they are listening than when they are reading. So those are some pretty compelling statistics. In addition, for students who are struggling with comprehension, auditory content can help close the gap. They can learn meaning of unknown words through incidental exposure and context when listening. They can use audio with higher level vocabulary to stretch students' abilities and introduce them to words they might not know, which increases their, academic vocabulary. So listening and reading together, when you're doing that together as well, it increases accuracy by 52%.
You may be familiar with a theoretical model of reading called the simple model. Research around this simple model of reading provides evidence that reading comprehension consists primarily of decoding and listening comprehension. When decoding, the process of translating text into pronounceable words, and listening comprehension abilities are put together, they predict student reading comprehension. So we can look at the components separately to better understand a student's reading comprehension. For example, a student who is weak in decoding but average in listening comprehension might be categorized or classified as a classic dyslexic. In contrast, students who are average in terms of their decoding skill but weaker in their listening comprehension might be labeled a poor comprehender, and students who are weak in both areas may be considered or are considered garden variety poor readers. And with the Lexile Listening Framework, we're developing a way for educators to better understand what underlies a student reading comprehension, what is happening with that student's listening comprehension, and what kind of skills are weaker for that particular student. Additional research shows that as readers develop, the importance of listening comprehension increases. The histogram on the left shows the amount of variance of listening comprehension in blue, decoding in green, and their shared variance in orange associated with the overall reading comprehension in grades 2, 4, and 8. While the shared variance is pretty stable over the years, there's reduced importance on decoding as students are starting to get the hang of how to decode and really make meaning of new words in text. As the students encounter more varied and challenging text, the question becomes whether they can understand the vocabulary and navigate the language to make more meaning. We know from various studies that the correlation between oral decoding and silent reading is high. A few examples, have a few examples in the table on the upper right of the slide. But as the importance of decoding tails off, the importance of listening comprehension again increases. But does this mean that we should only test decoding at the earlier grades and listening comprehension at the upper grades? Sure, no, of course not. You all know this. We really need to know about student strengths and weaknesses early on so we can address them as soon as we understand what they are. Poor comprehenders may have intact word decoding capabilities, but their comprehension, they may have a listening comprehension issue that may go unnoticed until later grades when they're faced with more complex texts. It's also important to note that students who have not mastered decoding can still learn language skills by listening to stories and content read aloud. Students can listen on a higher language level than they can read. So listening provides a way to improve students' language skills, making complex ideas more accessible to them, and exposing students to vocabulary and language patterns that aren't part of their everyday speech. And now we'll shift back to Monica to talk about the growing prominence of listening.
Thanks, Heather. While all this research has been going on at Metametrics with developing this new listening level, we've noticed a huge trend in the recognition that listening is an important and core part of literacy. And it's evidenced by the fact that it's now part of the Common Core, and listening is a tested skill, is a standard in all 50 states, and it is tested in 22 states. Most of these states are Common Core states that are using the SBAC, but there are some, such as Florida, that is not Common Core, and it has woven listening into their own ELA testing component. So that means that more than 10 million students in grades 3 through 11 are getting tested every year on their listening skills as part of their high-stakes ELA exam. And in some cases, this listening component makes up to 20% of the test. So the importance of establishing good listening skills can't be overstated, and especially for English language learners who are tested every year on listening skills in their tests. So that's nearly 15 million students tested on listening each year. Yet until now, there hasn't been a reliable third-party listening scale. But with this growing prominence, we feel like educators are recognizing its importance in literacy learning. And there's always been a focus on this, as we said, with English language learners, but not necessarily, with other in general ed students as much. That's all about to change. I'm just going to remind to mute yourself if you're in a noisy spot so everyone can hear. So the other thing I wanted to point out with the importance of listening is how this all impacts your college and career readiness of your students. This slide here is from a study that shows listening skills are ranked second in order of importance in a study of recruiters for mid-level jobs. We see this all the time in career readiness skills and in job performance skills, how important communication skills are. Speaking and listening consistently rank number 1 and 2 in many studies around this. Now, what's been missing, though, in the market is this ability to reliably test listening. So not just the ability to give a listening level for the audio, but also the ability to score a student and their listening skills. And it's this third-party, reliable listening scale that's going to lead to better learning. And I'm going to send it back to Heather to introduce you to the exciting new listening Lexile framework developed by Metametrics.
As I mentioned earlier, when showing you our roadmap for next year, Metametrics has been working really hard to provide tools to measure more aspects of literacy, which our huge focus is on reading right now. And the Lexile Listening Framework will have the very same components as our reading framework, the Lexile Framework for Reading. And that framework is used throughout the world to measure student reading ability and match readers to text. And we really want the listening framework to be as useful and supportive of educators as our reading framework. To that end, our research team has conducted a number of studies. On the student side, to get to a good measure of student listening ability, we partnered with Listenwise to conduct a huge pilot study of our listening test last spring. The study included more than 9,000 students, and we've since piloted our listening items and tested them again with about 8,000 more students, both internationally and domestically. So we can now create listening tests to serve a variety of purposes. So for benchmark testing, placement testing, progress monitoring. On the audio passage side, our research team has been analyzing the passage features that make audio passages more or less challenging for students to understand. And we started out with a list of more than 60 variables, and they've narrowed that list down to 12 that seem to be most important in understanding the complexity, and they're currently refining and validating that list of variables. The list includes content variables such as word frequency, age of acquisition and concreteness, and phonological variables, and also acoustic variables such as speech rate and speech to pause ratio.
Yeah,
we're really excited about our
before
ability.
you go on, Heather, I'm just going to jump in and say, like, I'm so excited by how much you've done with this, because listening is so complex. Just hearing that you've identified 12 variables, everything from age of word frequency and phonological variables. I think about audio stories that we have on Listenwise that have different accents and pacing and tone. Those are all things that are playing into this new listening measure. That this is really hard to do, is I guess what impressed me the most about it.
Yeah, we're really working to understand what the student experience is and what makes them more and less challenging for students, and really getting a handle on that. So it's fun. It's exciting work. Yeah. So we now have a measure of a student's listening ability, and also the measure of the listening passages on the Lexile scale. When we launch, we're in our final stages here now. We can use this information to monitor how students are growing in their listening skills over time. And we can also select passages on the passage side by considering their audio complexity, in addition to the specific subject and genre and student interests. So just like on the Lexile Framework for Reading, we have the reader or the listener side and the audio passage complexity side, and then you can use them in various ways to customize learning for students.
So I hope that at this point you're all as excited about this as I am, and how we are excited how this is going to transform students' ability to be tracking and improving their listening, and thus improving their overall literacy. And you're asking, well, how does this relate to Listenwise, or where can we find this level? And the answer is Listenwise will be the first education technology product or first company at all to have this level. And we're going to be introducing these new measures in January when they come out from Metametrics. And for those of you who aren't familiar with us, Listenwise is a listening and learning platform that allows you to bring audio stories to your classroom in grades 3 through 12. We will be introducing an elementary 3 through 5 curriculum in January with the release of this new level. So for those of you on the webinar who are already familiar with Listenwise and are customers and users, I hope you'll be excited to hear that we're going into the elementary level as well, because we feel like with the introduction of this new listening level, this by Metametrics, we're going to have the ability to better track and improve students' listening skills at all ages. But what Listenwise can help you do is find the appropriate stories, audio stories for your students that are curriculum aligned in English language arts, social studies, science, and of course, current events every single day of the school week. And in addition, all the lessons on Listenwise are aligned to your state standards with built-in literacy supports. All of the audio has interactive transcripts, so getting back to that statistic that I showed you earlier about how you can increase the accuracy by pairing audio with a transcript. We do it on every single story that we have on Listenwise, so it allows students to listen and read at the same time. And we also have auto-scored listening comprehension quizzes that are embedded in the lessons. And we'll go into a little bit more about the quizzes in a moment. But these audio stories can be used instructionally to address a wide variety of learning goals, including listening comprehension, many other common core skills, and it's free for teachers, so you can sign up for your free 30-day trial of Listenwise Premium, as well as much of Listenwise is free for teachers forever as well, but with a free 30-day trial, you can check out Premium. So I just wanted to show you what currently our language challenge level looks like and how we'll be changing that into the Lexile listening level. So currently we're classifying our audio stories as low, medium, or high, and that's going to be replaced on every single story in our lessons collection with a specific number driven from the Lexile measurement system. So that's where you'll be able to see it in our product, so that you will be able to select a more specific choice for your students. Now, those of you who are customers and are already familiar with this language challenge level, you will be getting this update with the Lexile listening level for free. And we are planning to add the measure for student progress in back to school. So right away, we'll be having the listening level on all the audio passages, and then we'll be able to have a benchmarking quiz that will be able to measure students' listening progress later next year. So if you look at this screenshot as well, you can see the interactive transcript as well as where the language challenge level currently is, which will soon be the new Lexile listening framework. And this will also give us enhanced search functionality, because you'll be able to search by the level of the story. Now, we know this is so important for English language learners, and I want to know in the chat box how many of you out there have ELLs and you're looking for high quality listening resources at the right level of your students. So before this, while we've had the ability to give you some indications around the language challenge of our stories, this new listening Lexile level will give a much more precise measurement that you'll be able to search all of the stories in our collection for and find the right stories for your students at the right time. And we know how important and valuable that is in teaching. Heather?
Yeah, now I'll share with you a bit more about the framework and some of the details and some of the benefits of using the framework. So we know students are exposed to a huge variety of spoken language. So we've developed passages to model the major areas that we've identified. So our teacher talks are designed to model the kind of language and lesson topics students are likely to encounter in classrooms. We have radio reports that are NPR, actual NPR interviews and investigative reports, and then others that are, you say they're NPR-like radio reports. We have a narrative category of passages that includes both narrative actually and expository. and they're similar to excerpts from an audio book. Dialogues are short pieces of conversation, usually between two people. All of these passage types will be available in our passage and item banks for the testing assessments, but each assessment won't necessarily include them all, and they don't need to include all of them because we'll be able to measure student listening ability from any combination of these types of passages.
Yeah, and I just want to add that we worked with Metametrics closely on this level. So as she noted, many of the stories, these radio reports, are taken from NPR, which is where we're getting a lot of our content and podcasts. So these are real world stories that measure a variety of things to determine the level of them.
Yeah, they're fantastic reports. They're so interesting. I should add that. And then to these passages, the item types we've developed are fairly consistent across all of the passage types. We're measuring student ability to identify main ideas, central purposes, and points of view. We ask that students make inferences and draw conclusions from what they've heard, and we also ask that they can identify specific information or details from the passage. The graphic here shows a basic passage and item format with the play button on the left and questions on the right. In general, students will be able to play the passage and then play it again and again as many times as they want before they...
I guess it goes beyond self.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that our multiple choice listening quizzes, which are formative, will still be on our platform, but we'll be introducing a benchmark type additional quiz for students next school year. That will be phase 2 of our product plans that will report student listening Lexile levels based on their assessments.
So with the assessments that we're developing, educators will have a great way to better understand students' ability to learn from listening to various types of content, from the teacher talk to radio reports, and then the more casual social dialogues. We also expect that more exposure to audio content will stimulate interest in audiobooks and prepare students to show what they're able to learn from listening in other contexts, as such as state exams in those areas where a state exam does assess listening. And
Listenwise will continue to have the reporting capability on students' listening skills that you can see on the bottom of this slide. Currently, we are assessing 8 strands of listening. The 4 primary ones that you see in the first couple columns are literal, vocabulary, main idea, and inferencing. And those we will be continuing to assess on those scores as well as others. So the reporting capability, if you are already a premium customer of Listenwise, you will still retain that, and it will be enhanced by these benchmark quizzes that we'll be adding as part of the new Listening Lexile Framework. So again, as I said, for customers, this listening Lexile audio level will be free with your current subscription, and you're going to start seeing it in mid to late January. And then if you're new to Listenwise, we'd love to offer you a discount on a site pilot of this. So I've put my email up there. You can email me directly, and we can get your pilot underway in the new year. We can set it all up, get it all ready, trained, and ready to go for you back to school in January. Because I know this time of year, it's a little hard to start something new with your students. But please contact me if you're interested in this offer. And remember that Listenwise is also free for teachers, and you can get a free 30-day trial of premium. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat and that we've received. So the first one is asking, Marilee is asking about how do these Lexile levels coincide with the Sefer levels? And I believe from my knowledge, we're not doing a crosswalk to Sefer. Those are language leveling scores that are from an international perspective test that for those of you who might not be familiar with it. And so I don't believe there's going to be a crosswalk to that. Heather, you can chime in on this and maybe share some about how you are thinking about crosswalking to reading and the Lexile reading measure.
Yeah, so you're getting to some things that are farther down the road with us with listening. After we develop the measures, we can get a better sense of their relationship to the CEFR levels. This is where we are on the reading side. We have done some linking studies looking at the relationship between our Lexile measures and assessments that report out in Lexiles now, as well as the CEFR levels. And so I see that coming down the road. It's certainly something that we are aware is out there and the importance of those levels internationally. And we will be looking at the relationship between the listening measures and those CEFR levels. We are also going to be and are currently doing studies looking at the relationship between reading measures and listening measures. And we did a huge study this fall where students took a reading assessment as well as a listening assessment, so we can see about making the listening scale compatible and actually use the same values as the reading scale. So when educators have a reading measure on the Lexile scale, they can relate it to a listening measure that's also on the scale. They're not going to be interchangeable, but you can see the relationship. We will build in a way to see the relationship between reading and listening, because we do know there's obviously a very strong relationship, and people will want to understand that so they can adjust their instruction and just support materials accordingly. But yeah, CEFR definitely on our radar. That's longer term, but we will be looking at that just like we are right now with reading.
And we are very excited about the correlation, or the looking at these two together, reading and listening, because we believe that listening is the missing piece of the literacy puzzle. And that if we can, with this new level, is going to give us all the ability to better track students' listening comprehension skills. And we've seen multiple studies that show a correlation between better reading and better listening and better reading, better listening and better learning. Now we believe we'll be able to do some causational studies around seeing exactly how listening impacts reading. So the future is great, I feel like, for the prominence of listening and literacy to grow with this new measure. So we are so delighted to be working with Lexile on it. And I can see in the chat box a lot of English language learner teachers who are super excited about this, because listening is such a key component to learning a new language. But for all of the teachers who might not have as many ELs in their classroom, like, this is so key to any student's ability to absorb academic vocabulary and stretch their receptive vocabulary skills, as well as learn new content, that I encourage you all to try it in your practice. So we're coming to the end of the webinar. Before it ends, I want to select the winner for the classroom headphone set. So okay, we've kind of pulled an electronic name out of the hat, and I'd like to congratulate Tori Baldwin of Jefferson Public Schools. You have won the classroom headphone set, and we will be contacting you about that offline. And Tori says, woohoo, in the chat box. Well, thank you all for joining. Thank you, Heather and Metametrics, for all the important work you've put into this significant Lexile listening scale. We are so excited to partner with you.
Thank you. It's been a great partnership, and we're really excited about this and this launch with Listenwise.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.